I live with my family. And I wanted to take a few moments this morning, or this afternoon, just to talk a little bit about the weather that our nation is experiencing and the incredibly low temperatures and snowfalls that we're getting all over the country right now. But before I begin, as I always do, please allow me to acknowledge the lands that I'm speaking to you from. So the lands where I live, Washington, D.C., these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. The Piscataway are the nation that they've lived here, they've hunted here, they farmed here and fished here. They raised their families here and buried their dead here long before Columbus got lost at sea, and they're still here. I acknowledge the Piscataway. I acknowledge their continued presence in these lands. I thank them for their stewardship of these lands, and I state how humbled I am to be living on their lands today. So, yeah, my Piscataway relatives. This morning, if you woke up and listened to the news, or maybe you're actually, for most Americans, you woke up and it was much colder than you probably have been in a very long time. Not only are places like Michigan and Minnesota and the northern states getting incredibly cold temperatures, but our southern states like Texas and Louisiana and Arizona and New Mexico are also getting very cold weather today and over the past few days. And we have seen some places around the country that are seeing some of their coldest weather in nearly a century. And others are seeing the coldest weather they've had in a few decades, several decades actually. I read one report that said 12 people have lost their lives because of this weather. And this morning there was a tornado, I believe, in North Carolina. And so there are a lot of things going on right now, especially in regards to weather. And I tweeted this morning, I just want to read something that I tweeted out this morning. I said, my prayers are with all the people and communities throughout this country enduring freezing temperatures and power outages, especially in areas not accustomed to it or equipped for it. Please make wise choices today, my relatives, regarding what is necessary and what isn't. Let me share this in my Twitter or in my chat here, and that's just a link to that tweet I put out this morning. But one of the things I wanted to talk about just for a few moments today is how important it is to have humility before the weather. A lot of times we have been trained as Americans, as members of Western society, that we can conquer anything. We've been told the lie that we are exceptional, and we are told that our technology gives us all of these advantages. And that's true, it does. Our technology is a great tool to help us both accomplish more and to be more efficient and to do more than we could do without it. But there's a few things that technology is a challenge for, and that's when we become too dependent on it, because technology eventually will fail. I remember when my family and I lived on the Navajo Nation, and for 3 years we lived in this hogan out in the middle of nowhere. We were 6 miles off the nearest paved road on a dirt road. You've heard me talk about living in that place before. No running water, no electricity, living in a one-room hogan with log walls and a dirt floor, an outhouse about 50 yards away. And we lived there for 3 years. And those 3 years were incredibly humbling, because it taught me how much I was dependent on so many other things just to survive. I remember when we first moved there, and I was traveling, not as much back then as I was before the pandemic, but I was still traveling. This was almost 15, nearly 20 years ago. And I was traveling, and I would go to cities like Denver or San Francisco or Los Angeles, and I would come back to our hogan, and I would be in our hogan with my family, as my wife and my son at that point. And the only artificial light we could see from the hogan was a cell phone tower about 5 miles away, and the satellites that were buzzing through the sky. But the thing that was most striking was how deadly silent it was. It was so quiet, especially if I came back from a large city, that my ears would literally ring for a few days because it was so quiet living out there. And because we lived at the end of a dirt road, or on a dirt road, 6 miles of dirt road, and the dirt out there is clay, when it would rain there, we could literally get stuck in our hogan. a simple rainstorm, not even a horrible rainstorm, but just a simple rainstorm, because it was clay, once it got wet, it would turn almost like an oil slick. And it didn't matter how big your truck was, or if you had four-wheel drive or whatever else, all you were going to do was dig deeper ruts if you tried to drive through it. Literally, when it rained there, we would have to stay home for sometimes days at a time. And that was humbling, because I actually realized how dependent I was and how much I took for granted a paved road. I'm going to share a blog post I wrote during that time. It's called Paved Roads, and it's a reflection on scripture and a reflection on my own attitude towards technology, and even understanding more God as a creator, and what does it mean to understand the power and the simplicity of both creation, and how dependent we are on technology. And so I welcome you to read that post. It's called Paved Roads. It's on my blog. I wrote it almost 15 years ago, I think. And it's a reflection on what I was learning, what I was experiencing at that time. But what was really kind of one of the stories we tell most often about those 3 years in that Hogan, I think it was our third year there. And we had another, I don't even know if we called them polar vortexes back then, but we had some very, very cold weather. And at one point it got down to about 20 below zero there. This is in Arizona. It's northern Arizona, so it's a higher elevation, but 20 below is deathly cold, as many of you know. And all we had was, we were in this one-room Hogan, which Navajo Hogan is actually quite good at maintaining heat, and we had a wood-burning stove, and so we were able to keep warm with that. But I remember how absolutely bitter cold it was, and we couldn't even go outside. It was so cold in the nights. And we just had to keep the fire going all the time, and it was quite an experience to have that. Another experience we had while living in that Hogan was at one point in the spring. I think this was also our second or third year there. The challenge of living on this dirt road is, when it rained, the road would turn to like an oil slick, and you couldn't drive on it. And so in the winter, the way you would get in and out of that area is at night when the road froze. If it snowed, or if the snow was melting, because it was higher elevation, like, we have massive temperature change. We could be down close to zero at night and be above freezing during the day. And so the time you knew you could get in and out of our area was in the middle of the night, because the road would be frozen and you could drive on top of the mud. And so the challenging time living there was in the spring, when we would still get regular snowfall, but it wouldn't freeze much at night. And so the road never got firm enough to drive on. And I remember one year we were there, and we got a late winter storm, and it lasted for quite a while. It was snowy and rainy and cold for almost a week and a half or 2 weeks. And we literally got stuck there. We couldn't drive in or out. It never got cold enough at night to freeze the road. And it never got dry enough that we could drive out on the road during the day. And we literally were stuck there for, I believe it was over a week, about 10 days, I believe. And we eventually ran out of food. And we had to, I remember one of the shepherds who lived on that same sheep camp there with us, one day he and I walked 6 miles to the paved road where family met us, and they had brought food for us, and we backpacked back in to bring the food back for our families, because you couldn't drive out on the road. We actually had to melt snow on our wood-burning stove in order to make sure we had enough drinking water. And we lived there for 10 days that way. And both of those experiences gave me an incredible humility to gave me a deep humility before nature, and before the weather. Living in a city, you tend to believe that the technology will always be there to protect you and to buffer you from nature. Your road will be paved, you'll have a building to go in to escape the weather, your heater will turn on when it gets cold. And actually, a lot of our more modern cities are some of the least capable of protecting us during severe weather conditions like we're having now, where we are having rolling blackouts throughout many of these southern states because electricity is in scarce supply. And I remember how safe I actually felt, even during those times living on the reservation, because we lived without electricity, we lived without running water, we knew how to survive that way, and we had the capacity to survive that way. Whereas now we have many people, millions of people who are living in cities and even in homes all across the country where they've lost power and they have no way to keep their food cold, they have no way to heat their homes, and it really creates a challenge. And that's why my prayers are with so many people, because our modern society doesn't really equip us to survive in severe weather conditions. And because we have so much technology, we can tend to treat weather as if it were more of a nonchalant thing. But we must remember how absolutely fragile we are, how powerful nature and the weather is, and how much we have to respect it. And so for those of you who are living in right now in the midst of this very severe cold weather, I really do encourage you to have great wisdom and incredible humility in what you decide to do and not to do today. Make very wise choices about what is necessary and what is not necessary to accomplish in weather like this. Because weather like this can have severe consequences on our health and our well-being. And because of rolling blackouts, because of icy roads, because of all the things that we take for granted, and yet we're not equipped to live within these extreme conditions, the things that normally buffer us from the weather can actually end up hurting us and even causing death at times. And so I want to use this as a reminder that we need to have a great humility before nature and in front of the weather. And it's good that we have technology. It's good that we have indoor heating. It's good that we have lights and fans and computers and the internet and all these other things. But we also need to understand that during weather like this, we have to really just look at what are the basic necessities that we need to do. And that was one of the things that was very challenging about living in the Hogan, actually. Because we lived in this Hogan, we lived in this community that had no running water, no electricity, because we had to haul water almost daily and we couldn't store much food there, because we could easily get stuck there even by the smallest of rainstorms, and we had been stuck there for up to 10 days at one point because we knew it could potentially get as bitter cold as that. Much of our time that we spent living there was based on thinking about survival. And this actually hurt a lot of our relationships with our friends who didn't live in that same community. Because once we would travel off the reservation and go into cities and towns, whether it was Gallup or whether it was Denver or Phoenix or LA or other places around the reservation, we noticed that once we got past the discussion with people of what is it like to live in a Hogan, we had very little to talk about. And the reason was so much of our day-to-day life was based on survival. And so much of the lives of everyone else was based on entertainment. We were thinking about, do we have enough food? Do we have access to water? What are we going to do if we can't get home tonight or we can't get out from home tomorrow? We were thinking basic survival questions. And most of the other people we were interacting with who didn't live in that environment, their biggest questions were entertainment. What are we going to watch on TV? How are we going to entertain ourselves? What games are we going to play? What are we going to do tonight after work? And we lost an ability to relate with people. Now, I'm not saying living in a city is bad. I'm not saying this is a negative thing. But I'm saying we have to understand that our technology can remove us and put a buffer between us and some of the basic tools and things we need to just survive. And when weather becomes severe like it is now, we can find we actually don't have the resources. We don't have even the ability to just do basic survival. And some of that's because we think things are necessary that aren't necessary in weather like this, and other times it's because we just don't have the tools, right? If we have electric heat in our house and the power goes out, we lose our ability to heat our homes. And so I just want to encourage people to, as you endure this weather today, tomorrow, throughout this week, please make wise choices about what is necessary and what is not necessary. Please remember how fragile we are as humans and how overly dependent we can become on technology. And please just remember we need to be humble before nature, before creation, and before the weather. I hope this is helpful. I hope that you are enjoying and able to stay warm and drink a cup of coffee today. I'm enjoying my second cup of coffee, and I decided to take a break from talking about politics and the craziness going on here in Washington, D.C. There's much more to talk about later this week after President's Day and other things. I needed to kind of let my brain kind of decompress for a little bit. And so I hope that you have a beautiful day, my relatives. I hope that you are able to stay warm and to stay safe. For those of you who need to go out for work or for other things, please make wise choices today. And make sure you check in on your neighbors and your relatives and those most vulnerable in your community, and walk in beauty. And may we learn how to walk in beauty together. I can't have my relatives. How going that?